The Class Zero trapped the galaxy was a vast place, full of strange worlds and alien species. But none were more dangerous than the Class Zero Deathworld. The galaxy's most powerful empire had heard stories of these worlds, where life was vicious, where every creature was a deadly threat. And yet, they had underestimated one thing: humanity. The Empire had been watching Earth for centuries, convinced that humans were weak and easily controlled. They saw Earth as a small, insignificant planet, and the humans as little more than ants. The Empire, with its superior technology and vast military power, had decided it was time to rid themselves of the human race once and for all. Their plan was simple: send the humans to a Class Zero Deathworld, a place where no one could survive, a place where every step could be their last. The Empire thought this would be an easy victory, one they could boast about to the rest of the galaxy. They never imagined that this would be the biggest mistake of their lives. The humans were forced onto their ship and pushed toward the Deathworld. It was a cold, barren planet, with no sign of life except for the deadly predators that roamed the land. The humans had no weapons, no supplies, nothing but the clothes on their backs and their will to survive. As the ship entered the atmosphere of the Deathworld, the humans aboard looked out of the windows. The planet below was a swirling mass of dark clouds, lightning flashing through the air. A horrible place. The humans knew what awaited them, but they refused to give up. They would not let this empire destroy them. On the ground, the Empire's commanders watched closely, their eyes glued to the screens. They waited for the humans to crash, to be torn apart by the savage creatures that called the Deathworld home. It was supposed to be over within minutes, but something strange happened. The humans had survived. Not only that, but they had already begun to adapt. The ship had crash-landed in a dense jungle, surrounded by trees that towered high above them. At first, the humans were disoriented, unsure of what to do next. But they quickly realized they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, they had a chance. The predators of the Deathworld were fierce and terrifying, huge, insect-like creatures that would tear apart anything in their path. But the humans weren't just running. They were thinking. They built traps, used the jungle's thick vines to create barriers, and worked together to stay one step ahead of the deadly beasts. The Empire's commanders, watching from their distant command center, began to frown. The humans weren't dying as they expected. The first few days passed with no sign of the humans' defeat. Instead, there were reports of strange, unexplainable things happening. The humans were using the jungle to their advantage. They had set up defenses, trapping and killing the predators that were supposed to destroy them. The Empire's officials were furious. How could this be? How could these weak, insignificant humans survive in such a deadly place? The Empire's confidence began to crack. What they had thought would be an easy victory was turning into a nightmare. The humans were becoming more resourceful by the day. They used the predators' own instincts against them, learning to predict their movements and setting up ambushes. They even started scavenging for the few valuable resources. The Deathworld had to offer materials that could help them build shelter, make tools, and defend themselves better. On the other side of the galaxy, the Empire's leaders were beginning to panic. They couldn't let this continue. Their reputation was on the line. If these humans were allowed to survive and even thrive on such a deadly world, it would mean the end of the Empire's rule. They couldn't let it go on any longer. They decided to send reinforcements, an entire fleet of warships, armed to the teeth, to finish the job. They would wipe out the humans and end this humiliation once and for all. They couldn't allow their mistake to become a symbol of weakness. But what the Empire didn't know was that they had already lost. The humans were not the prey, they were the hunters. They had taken the Deathworld's challenges and turned them into their strengths. And now they were ready for the Empire's next move, The trap the Empire had set had backfired, and the humans, against all odds, were about to turn the tables. Asterisk the unseen advantage. The Empire had expected the humans to perish within days, their bodies swallowed up by the deadly creatures of the Deathworld. But the humans had done something no one expected. They had begun to thrive. The jungle was not just a deadly place. It was also full of hidden resources, and the humans were learning how to use them. The environment, harsh and unforgiving as it was, became their ally. They built shelters high in the trees, using the thick branches to keep safe from the predators below. The Empire's surveillance satellites could see the humans, but the humans saw something else entirely. They didn't just survive, they adapted. It wasn't long before they began to explore the jungle, discovering the resources hidden beneath its deadly surface. They found strange plants that could be used to make medicine. They learned fish from the rivers that flowed through the jungle, and the most surprising discovery came when they found a natural rock formation that could be used to forge basic weapons. The humans weren't just waiting to die, they were preparing for the future. Meanwhile, the Empire's commanders were becoming more frustrated. They had expected a massacre, but the humans were proving to be something far more dangerous. They were learning, evolving faster than anyone could have predicted. The Empire had underestimated the humans' ability to think, adapt, and survive. But there was something else the Empire couldn't see. The humans were developing an unspoken unity. The situation on the Deathworld had forced them to work together. Like never before, people who had once been strangers now relied on one another. They shared everything, from food to knowledge. Every individual brought something to the table, and together they were becoming a force to be reckoned with. One of the survivors, a former engineer named John, had become a leader of sorts. His resourcefulness and quick thinking had saved dozens of lives. His ability to understand the world around them, whether it was the terrain or the creatures, had turned him into a key figure in their survival. He saw things others didn't. The Deathworld's challenges weren't insurmountable. They were opportunities to grow stronger. He taught the others how to create traps for the deadly creatures and how to navigate the jungle safely. Meanwhile, the Empire was growing impatient. The first reports from their fleet were disturbing. The humans hadn't just survived, they were pushing back. Their makeshift weapons had caused serious damage to the Empire's surveillance drones. The creatures that the Empire had sent to kill the humans were being outsmarted. How was this possible? The Empire was on the brink of sending an entire fleet of warships to crush the humans once and for all. But the humans weren't helpless victims. They had already begun organizing and strategizing, using the world's natural resources and their own wits to turn the tide. The Deathworld had been a trap, but now it was a testing ground for something far greater. The Empire's arrogance had clouded their judgment. They had believed humanity to be weak, unworthy of anything but annihilation. But what they didn't realize was that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to endure. They had underestimated the one thing that no empire, no matter how vast, could conquer: the human spirit. As the days passed, the humans began to hear rumors. There was talk of reinforcements. They knew the Empire wouldn't just let them be. But now, instead of fear, the humans were ready. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were preparing to fight back. The Empire had made a grave mistake. They had pushed humanity into a corner, and they had no idea what was coming next. The call for help the humans had become something that the Empire had never imagined: a resilient force. As the days turned into weeks, their confidence grew. They had learned the ways of the Deathworld. They had adapted, and now they were ready to take the next step. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back. John, the engineer turned leader, had spent the last few days observing something troubling. The Empire's drones were everywhere, hovering in the sky, scanning every inch of the jungle. But despite their best efforts, they hadn't been able to catch the humans. The Empire was beginning to realize that the humans weren't just surviving. They were learning to hide, to fight, and to think like the predators that roamed the planet. The idea came to John one night as he sat by the fire, his mind racing. If the Empire was watching from above, then perhaps they had made a mistake in thinking that the humans were isolated. The Deathworld was vast, and there were more human ships still out there somewhere. John knew there was a chance to send a message, a call for help. Using the makeshift equipment they had managed to scavenge from the wreckage, John and a few others set to work. They gathered parts from old communication satellites torn apart, drones and broken machinery, piecing together a transmitter. It was a risky move. If the Empire picked up the signal, it would only make them more determined to destroy them. But John had no choice. They needed help, and they needed it fast. The Deathworld was a deadly prison, and the humans couldn't stay trapped forever. The signal was weak, but it was enough. John sent out the message, coded in a series of strange encrypted bursts. It was simple but powerful. We're still alive. We need help. The message wasn't just a cry for rescue. It was a challenge to the Empire. It was a signal that humanity had not only survived their deadly trap, but they had fought back, and they were ready for more. The signal traveled through space, far beyond the Empire's reach. It wasn't a large fleet that would come, nor a massive army. It was something different, something unexpected. The humans were not alone in their struggle. The message would reach Earth, where a handful of people still believed in humanity's strength. Back in the Empire's command center, the response was swift. They had picked up the signal, and it sent a shiver down their spines. The Empire had underestimated humanity for too long, and now the humans were fighting back with a fury they had never anticipated. The commanders gathered in their war rooms, their faces pale. The fleet was already on its way to the Deathworld, but this was different. The humans had sent a message. The Empire had assumed the Deathworld would be their final resting place, that the humans would never be able to fight back. But now, the humans had done the unthinkable. They had shown they could call for help, they could fight, and they could survive. In a panic, the Empire's commanders scrambled to assess the damage. Reports came in that several drones had been destroyed by the humans' traps. More troubling, there were signs that the humans had begun to communicate with Earth, calling for reinforcements. This was no longer a simple execution. The Empire had awakened something they couldn't control, a force of human willpower that had only just begun to show its power. The message wasn't just a plea, it was a declaration. The humans were not going to sit and wait to die. They were fighting back, and now they were reaching out to Earth. If the Empire didn't act fast, they would face the full fury of a human retaliation, unlike anything they had ever encountered. The Empire was no longer in control. And the worst part, they didn't know just how much the humans had grown in such a short time. The signal had only been the beginning. The Empire's shock. The Empire's leaders had thought they were in control, that the Deathworld would be the humans' final test. They had thrown them into the most dangerous place in the galaxy, confident it would be their graveyard. But now, with the transmission from the humans still echoing in their minds, they began to feel something they hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. The Empire's fleet was en route, carrying a force strong enough to wipe out anything standing in their way. Yet, as they approached the Deathworld, something strange happened. The planet below wasn't what the Empire had imagined. Instead of seeing the destruction of the humans, they saw something far more unsettling: an organized defense. From the surface, the humans had begun to build. It wasn't just makeshift shelters or traps anymore. They were crafting weapons, fortifying positions, and even creating communication relays, trying to establish contact with Earth. The Empire's fleet could see the humans, work clearly through their surveillance systems. The humans had turned the Deathworld into their home, and they had built a resistance. The first attack came unexpectedly. Empire drones, usually so precise and ruthless, were ambushed in the dense jungle. Human traps had been set small but effective, designed to incapacitate and destroy. The drones that had been sent to survey the humans were now being dismantled, their parts scavenged for the humans' growing arsenal. The Empire's commanders, watching from their command center, were left in stunned silence. There, fighting back, one commander muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The news spread quickly through the Empire's ranks. The fleet, which had been so certain of an easy victory, now found itself faced with an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. The humans weren't just surviving, they were organizing, adapting, and most terrifying of all, they were turning the Deathworld into a deadly battleground. And then a new report came in. A fleet of smaller ships had emerged from the other side of the planet. The humans had done it. They had built a rudimentary fleet using the very wreckage left behind by their previous crashes. These ships weren't advanced, but they were enough to show the Empire something they could not deny. The humans were resourceful, and they were learning fast. The Empire had believed that sending the humans to the Deathworld would break their spirit. Instead, it had awakened something far worse. The humans had turned the tables, and the Empire's military commanders now realized they were in serious danger. The fleet was supposed to crush the humans, but it was becoming clear that the humans were no longer easy prey. On the surface, John and his group of survivors watched the Empire's ships as they arrived in orbit, their massive warships blocking out the stars. The humans were now fully aware of what was at stake. The plan had shifted from survival to resistance. But as they looked at the Empire's overwhelming force, they didn't shrink in fear. Instead, they stood tall, ready to defend the planet that had become their home. John had been preparing for this moment. Using their limited resources, he had instructed his group to keep building, keep strengthening their positions. They had no illusions about the Empire's strength, but the humans had something the Empire had forgotten: unity. The group had formed bonds, working together like never before. Each person had a role, and each role was crucial. As John stood at the edge of their fortified camp, looking out into the jungle, he felt something he hadn't expected: hope. The humans had turned the Deathworld from a trap into a battlefield, and now they had a chance. The Empire's fleet began to descend, but John knew they were not alone anymore. The message had been sent. Earth was listening, and they had no idea that the humans were now ready to fight for the future of their entire species. The Empire's commanders had miscalculated. This was no longer a simple execution. It was the beginning of a war that the Empire wasn't prepared for. The human resilience, the Empire's warships descended like a shadow over the Deathworld, their weapons primed, ready to strike. The humans had made their stand, but they were no match for the overwhelming might of the fleet. Or so the Empire believed. From their vantage points in the jungle, John and the other survivors watched the massive ships approach, their engines burning bright as they descended through the thick clouds. The air was heavy with tension, and yet there was no fear in the humans' eyes. They had already faced the Deathworld's creatures and survived against all odds. They had built weapons, traps, and defenses. They had done the impossible, and now they were ready for what the Empire had planned for them. "Stay calm," John said to his group. "This isn't the end. It's just another challenge." His words were simple, but they carried a power that resonated with everyone who had gathered. These humans, once weak and scattered, had come together as one. They had proven that, despite the odds, they could endure. The Empire had thought it would be an easy victory, but now they were about to find out just how wrong they were. John's team had worked tirelessly to create a new weapon, a modification of the Deathworld's own resources. something that could hurt the Empire where they least expected. They had spent days foraging, scavenging, and tinkering with every piece of tech they could find. What they had built wasn't much, but it was enough to give the Empire pause. The humans had weaponized the very environment that had once been their prison. As the fleet moved closer, the humans set their plan into motion. They launched the first strike, not from weapons of metal or firepower, but from the jungle itself. The vines, strong enough to ensnare the deadly creatures of the Deathworld, were now used to trap the Empire's drones. Large, mechanical arms, created from jungle materials, reached out and seized the war machines, pulling them to the ground, where humans swarmed over them like ants. The Empire's commanders watched in horror as their drones, their most advanced surveillance tools, were dismantled and destroyed by the very planet they thought would be the humans' graveyard. They're using the environment against us, one of the commanders said, his voice shaking. How is this possible? The humans had created a battlefield out of the very world the Empire had thought would end them. The planet that was supposed to be their tomb had become their weapon. The Empire responded with firepower, unleashing a barrage of missiles, lasers, and energy blasts at the jungle, trying to burn it all away, but it wasn't enough. The jungle fought back, twisting and turning, sending thick thorn-covered vines to ensnare anything that came too close. Each strike from the Empire only seemed to make the humans more determined. They had found a rhythm, a way of using the Deathworld's deadly features to their advantage. And then, as the dust settled from the Empire's bombardment, a new kind of force emerged. The humans, using their small fleet of makeshift ships, launched a surprise counterattack. The ships were crude, barely held together with the wreckage of their own crash, but they were fast and relentless. They darted through the skies, attacking the Empire's warships with precision and speed that surprised even the most experienced of the Empire's fleet commanders. We underestimated them, a fleet commander muttered as the human ships zipped past his warship, launching strikes that caused massive damage to the Empire's outer defenses. The Empire's vast fleet was beginning to falter. They had underestimated the humans, thinking their primitive technology and ragged survivors would be easy to crush. But the humans were proving something far more terrifying. Their resilience was unstoppable. Every time the Empire tried to break them, they came back stronger. Every time they thought they had defeated humanity, the humans found a way to rise. Again, on the ground, John watched the Empire's ships struggle against the onslaught of human ingenuity. His heart swelled with pride. The humans had done it. They were no longer prey, they were the hunters. But the Empire wasn't going to give up. The warships above were gathering their forces, and John knew the fight wasn't over. But for the first time since they'd been thrown onto the Deathworld, he felt a flicker of hope. The humans had shown the Empire that they weren't just a mistake to be wiped out. They were a force of nature, and now they were ready to make their stand. The battle for survival had become the battle for victory, and humanity was no longer fighting just for their lives. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, not turning the tables the Empire had come to destroy. Instead, they found themselves outmaneuvered by survivors with nothing left to lose. From the moment the first Empire ship was brought down by homemade EMP bursts crafted from salvaged drone cores, everything changed. What was meant to be a clean sweep had turned into a full-blown war zone, and the humans were winning battles they had no right to win. The skies over the Deathworld cracked with fire. Empire cruisers, now wary of the jungle below, hovered at a cautious distance. Their scans showed nothing but chaos heat signatures everywhere, impossible to track. The humans had blanketed the jungle with a mist of natural chemicals that confused the Empire's sensors. Even their most advanced tracking systems couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. Where are they? An officer snapped aboard the Imperial dreadnought. "They're everywhere and nowhere," replied the technician, sweat forming on his brow. "They've cloaked the jungle in interference, Commander. We can't lock targets." On the ground, John knelt beside an overgrown root system, examining a small display unit tied to their last surviving beacon. The signal had been picked up. Earth had received their call. Reinforcements would come. But John knew better than to wait for rescue. They had to win this war first, with their own hands. Over the past weeks, the humans had transformed. What began as a scattered group of survivors was now a coordinated guerrilla force. Every fallen drone was a gift. Every crashed Imperial pod became spare parts. The humans had forged plasma spears from shattered warheads, turned tree sap into explosive gel, and hollowed out massive roots to serve as tunnels and ambush points. But what truly terrified the Empire was not the weapons. It was the silence. Empire patrols disappeared without a trace. Entire scouting teams never returned. Drones would go offline and reappear in human hands, flying back to the Empire fleet and exploding mid-air. The Deathworld, once the galaxy's most feared prison, had become the humans' hunting ground. Above, the Empire's admiral paced. His command deck, jaw clenched. This world ... this planet. It was supposed to break them. "It has," whispered his second-in-command, "but not how we expected. It burned away their fear. What's left now is something we can't control." Then came the moment that turned dread into panic. A human ship rose from the jungle. Canopy, not an old, shattered escape pod, but a rebuilt, refitted Imperial scout vessel. Painted black with jungle ash, powered by a hybrid core of Empire tech and Deathworld energy crystals. The ship flew straight at the Empire's front line and vanished. Seconds later, 3 enemy warships blinked off the sensors. Gone. No explosion, no trace, just silence. John's plan had worked. They hadn't destroyed the ships. They'd disabled them using the Empire's own cloaking code, stolen weeks ago from a captured AI core. Those warships were still alive, just blind, deaf, and powerless in the sky. The humans didn't need to win with firepower. They just needed to make the Empire afraid to use theirs. "They're rewriting the rules," the Admiral muttered. "They're turning our war into their game." John stood at the top of a high ridge, watching the stars above. His people, once scientists, farmers, doctors, children, had become warriors. Not because they wanted war, but because war had been forced upon them. And now, humanity was showing the galaxy a truth long ignored. You don't push a species into hell and expect them to stay there. You either watch them burn, or watch them climb back out with fire in their eyes. The Empire had come to conquer. Now, they were just trying to survive. And the worst part? Earth hadn't even arrived yet. Asterisk. The galactic reckoning, the sky split open. A ripple tore through space above the Deathworld, silent at first, then thunderous. Light bent, air trembled, and then the first human dreadnought arrived, but it didn't announce itself with a transmission. It didn't broadcast a message of peace or war. It simply hovered silent, massive, and glowing with the unmistakable pulse of Earth's latest war core. The Empire's sensors screamed warnings too late. This ship wasn't like the salvaged vessels the survivors had pieced together. This was something new, something terrifying, something built after humanity learned how to survive a Deathworld. On the jungle floor, John looked up. His face, smeared with dirt and smoke, broke into a slow, stunned smile. "They came," he whispered. "Earth came." But the Empire didn't see it as hope. They saw it as judgment. Panic echoed across the Empire's fleet. The Admiral barked orders: form a blockade. Target their engines. Don't let it land. But none of it mattered. Because before their weapons could fire, The human dreadnought blinked once, and then the stars rained fire. Not lasers, not missiles, but a pulse pure gravity, folded and released. Empire warships collapsed inward like paper in a storm, drawn into themselves, crushed by the very physics they claimed to master. The dreadnought didn't need to fight in the traditional sense. It simply rewrote the rules. The Empire had never seen this kind of power. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't chaotic. It was cold. Precise. Human. From orbit. Reinforcements poured in small, sleek crafts marked with Earth's sigil. A single burning star rising behind a silhouette of Earth's continents. Soldiers descended not in drop pods, but in adaptive suits, each one synchronized to the terrain, guided by the survivor network John had helped build. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a reckoning. The Empire's remaining ships tried to retreat, but it was too late. Earth's fleet had arrived using jump technology. The Empire had only theorized. Instant displacement, silent propulsion. Energy shielding that bent light and mass like waves. Every Empire countermeasure failed. Their Empire wasn't outdated. It was obsolete. On the ground, John watched as Earth soldiers moved like ghosts through the jungle, linking up with survivors, reinforcing positions, healing the wounded. The bond was instant. No salute, no orders needed. Just a look, a nod, and the knowledge. You made it. You held the line. The jungle, once a living nightmare, now served as the throne room of humanity's rise. In the command chamber of the last orbiting Empire ship, the Admiral sat in silence. All reports had stopped. The humans weren't just destroying them. They were letting them watch as the survivors, those they'd sentenced to death, rose from the dirt and stood taller than before. Watch as Earth's fleets arrived without rage or cruelty, but with the calm certainty of a force that knew it had already won. Then a signal came through. From the dreadnought. It was one word: observe. The Empire's last remaining commanders watched as the human survivors planted a beacon into the heart of the Deathworld's jungle, not to claim the planet, not to extract resources, but to leave behind a warning. A holographic projection burst into the sky, visible to every Empire sensor, every satellite, every distant observer. To all empires, to all species. We were thrown here to die. We did not die. You made us what we are now. Remember this planet, because from here we rise. The transmission spread across the stars like wildfire, and across 1,000 systems, silence followed. Empire, once so proud, so invincible, had pushed humans into a class-own Deathworld. But the humans didn't just survive. They changed, they evolved, and what returned from the fire was not what the galaxy expected. It was stronger. Faster. Smarter. United. And now, the galaxy would remember this day not as the fall of humanity, but as the rise of something far more dangerous, a human-led future. And it all began with a trap.